Journey of the Sparrows, Chapter 13. We waited 2 more days to see if someone found a ride south. During those days, Julia asked me 2 more times if I was still intent on going. I answered calmly, yes, that if she tried to stop me, I'd leave right then. I tried to explain to Oscar that I would be gone and would bring back Teresa, but whenever I tried to talk to him about it, he'd cry and hold on to me. Tomas came with Marta to pick up Marta's girls the second evening. I told Oscar to go in the other room so we could talk privately. Julia, her eyes down, said, "Maria thinks she should go, not me." Marta turned to me. "But dear God, you're so young." "It's so dangerous," Tomas said, running his hand through his hair, "and we haven't found any rides yet, and you don't even know the way." I saw tears on Julia's cheeks. "That's what we need to talk to you about," I said. "What if I glanced at Julia and said it quickly. "What if I hitchhiked?" Julia opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, Marta cried, shaking both hands in the air. "Hitchhike? Ave Maria Purissima!" She rolled her eyes to the ceiling. "Don't you know what happens when a girl hitchhikes? You're as green as grass." "Then what about a bus?" I glanced around. Oscar was in the doorway listening. "But a bus costs so much money," Tomas said. "We've got it," Julia said, "from Donna Elena." "Ah," Marta sighed. "She's a good woman. A gift from God," Julia nodded. "Enough money for all the way down and back?" Tomas asked. "I don't know," I said. $300? "That won't do it," Tomas responded, walking to the open window. "Not coming back with a baby. You'll need rides part of the way." He turned and looked directly at me, a curl from his hair falling down over part of his forehead. "And it's so unsafe. I've almost died crossing." I know," Julia cried. Oscar came running to me from across the room, and I reached down to hold him against me. "Tomas," Marta said, "we can give her our map." Yes, Tomas answered, pacing around the room. "And I know somebody who will make you a fake card. He charges $75, and if they look close, they can tell it's forged. But if immigration just glances, it'll work." Tomas continued to pace around the room. Then suddenly his face lit up. He stopped and touched my shoulder. "I know," he said. "There's a town halfway down in Illinois that has many migrants. They're people from Mexico and Texas who follow the crops. If you get that far on the bus, one of them might be going south. There's a good woman there. She took me in once and fed me for about a week. Her name is Ana Aragon. And if she's not there, others might help you. And if no one can do it, you could take the bus again." "Oh, Tomas," Julia said. "It'd be so good if someone could help her. I'm so afraid about her going all alone." Marta put her hand around Julia. "I know what the waiting's like," she said. "Honest to God, it's almost worse than going yourself." Julia nodded. I went to our mattress and got out my drawings. "Thomas, when I finish these, will you try and sell them at the store, the one where they sold my work for so much money? It'll help Oscar and Julia while I'm gone." Tomas nodded and smiled gently at me. Then he gave me the address of the men who would forge me an identification card. By the next night, I had a card taped in plastic to keep it from getting wet, and Julia and I took Oscar and the baby to see Tomas and Marta again. We talked together in the kitchen, away from Marta's boarders. Ramona whimpered. Marta took the baby from Julia's arms, and Julia bent down and held Oscar against her. "I've come to say goodbye," I said, looking at Tomas, then back at Marta. "And to get the map and give Tomas my drawings to sell." Tomas reached for the 2 pieces of wood I held. "These are good, but the eyes are sad," he said to me. "'Cause of Mama," I whispered. Tomas nodded tenderly. "I made this for you," I said, and took another work out of a bag. On a piece of nearly white wood, I'd drawn a bright sun splintering through the sky. The light shattered into blue and yellow and danced on the sea green that I imagined was the ocean. The water and sky wove together like a sunset and supported a swimming child. I handed it to Tomas. He looked at it. "Gracias," he said. Then he hugged me. Finally, he pulled back. "I'll get the map." His voice cracked. He went into the other room and returned. The map was worn at the folds until it was fragile, like the picture of the little boy I had drawn for Oscar. Everything was in English, and I recognized nothing. Tomas pointed to a penciled circle. "This is Chicago." He flipped the whole map over. And this is the border of Mexico and Matamoros. I swallowed. The bus will take you from Chicago to Onarga, Thomas said, tracing the route with his finger. That's where you'll find Ana Aragon. His eyes were soft and moist. Marta went to a coffee can and took out money. I've got $10. Take this, she said to me. And I've got $12, Tomas added. I can't take your money, I said to both of them. You've already done so much. Marta sighed. Ah, child, you'll need it. Tomas agreed, and Julia nodded at me solemnly. I thought of Teresa and whispered, Gracias. Marta reached over and cupped my face with her hands. May God bless you, Maria. We'll watch Julia and the little ones while you're gone. One thing I can say, girl, you've got gumption. Marta and Julia stepped back and turned away, pulling Oscar with them. Tomas reached for me, hugged me tightly, and held me against him. I felt his warmth spread through my body, and then pulled back so I could see his face. I saw tears in his blue eyes. I thought of leaving the necklace with Julia, but I decided to wear it, for luck. I whispered. Tomas smiled. Yes, do. It'll remind you of all of us and how much we want you back. Be careful, he said softly and kissed me on the forehead. As we left the apartment, Julia said to me, I'll take Oscar and Ramona home so you can say goodbye to Donna Elena. I won't ask you if you talked to her about the money, but if you did, little sister, I'm grateful, very grateful. A short time later, Donna Elena knelt with me in front of Our Lady and the saints and prayed. I looked at the Virgin with confusion and wished I had the courage to ask Donna Elena if she ever doubted. As Donna Elena stepped into her kitchen, I glanced over to where her old carving of San Isidro had been. The spot was empty, and the little light was gone. Then Donna Elena came back into the room and gave me a plastic bag with some baby aspirin, vitamins, azafran for fever, and a tiny sealed bottle. There's some medicine in the bottle that will make your little sister quiet when you cross, she said, but be very careful with it. Only give her 1 or 2 drops. Too much might really hurt her. 1 or 2 drops only, I repeated. Then I whispered, I don't know how to thank you, Donna Elena. As I was leaving, the old woman held my face in her hands, and again I smelled the moss and ferns. May the saints be with you, she said. I prepared to leave early the next morning, sewing most of the money and identification into the hem of my clothes to keep it safe, and carrying the plastic bag with medicines in Julia's pouch, which I wore around my neck. I kissed Ramona as she slept and carried Oscar to the door. When I set him down, he wrapped his arms around my hips and sobbed. Julia spoke. Maria, if you've got to hitchhike, don't get in a car that only has men. And stay near a door so you can reach a handle. She crossed herself. If Teresa is very sick, buy medicine and get her stronger before you try to cross back. And remember, don't give up hope for Mama. Maybe she'll escape again. She reached out and touched her forehead against mine. Oh, I love you, little sister. Remember that we're family. You're not alone. Her voice broke and she didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, May God bring you back to me. She smiled through tears. Papa always said you were going to save the family. I bent down to Oscar. Oscar Sparrow, I'll be back with Teresa. You've got our pictures on the walls to help you, and Julia will take care of you. I held his little body against mine, feeling the fragile life within it. Finally, Julia picked him up and kissed me again. I went out the door, down the street, and took the L to the downtown bus depot. When I arrived at my stop, I took the stairs down to the confusion, rush, and noise of the center of the city. Tall department stores rose from the sidewalks and displayed plastic models dressed in strange, elegant clothing. The sounds of traffic, of police whistles, and the voices of people rang together. And I was already afraid and wished Julia was with me. A strange man stood against a building, holding a microphone and shouting out phrases about God and Jesus and the end of the world. I walked past a woman selling flowers, the flower's sweetness reminding me of home and Mama. The two blocks later, rising above the crowd, I saw the sign of the Greyhound bus depot, with an outline of a long, stretched-out dog rising toward the sky. Then I noticed a lamppost with a poster taped to it. A child's face, almost like Oscar's, was on the poster. The face frightened and the child's eyes pleading. I went up to the poster so I could read it. Part of the writing was in Spanish and part in English. The caption read, "Justice for the Salvadoran refugees." I stared at it with my mouth open and read the smaller print. "Join us," it said, "so victims of the U.S.-backed war against the people of El Salvador, like this boy, can stay in our land legally and safely." Underneath the words was a phone number. I felt tears in my eyes. Maybe this had something to do with whatever help Father Jonathan was trying to get us. I crossed myself and prayed as I walked. A window on my right was filled with radios, tape recorders, and televisions. I stood for a moment, watching the television screens. Faces were laughing, and a wheel was being whirled around in a game show. I took a few more steps, looking at it, and as I turned and glanced back at the street, I saw a dark-haired man gluing up a poster on another lamppost. A poster exactly like the one I had just read. A blonde woman stood near him, handing out papers to a passerby. I stood quietly, watching them. The woman tried to give papers to several people, who shook their heads and hurried faster. Then she noticed me. She went on with her work, glancing at me. Finally, she stopped trying to give out the papers, spoke to the dark-haired man, nodded toward me, and walked over to where I stood. "We're part of a movement," she said quietly in perfect Spanish. "We're helping people without documents, those who have come here secretly because of killings in their lands." She paused, then asked, "Would you like to read about our group?" I nodded. She handed me a paper. "We're trying to change the laws," she continued, "to give a safe place for people like the little boy on the poster." "Won't you get in trouble?" I asked softly. "It's worth the risk," she said. "Are there many of you?" My voice cracked as I said it. "Yes, many," she said, and repeated the word. "Many. Would you like our address?" I nodded again and glanced around, wondering if police might be watching. She also looked around. Turning as if she wasn't speaking to me, but staring out at the street, she said quietly, "We're having a meeting tonight. You could join us." "I can't. I'm leaving Chicago for a while. But I'll be back." A policeman walked down the street, and I turned back toward the televisions. A man in a convertible playing loud music pulled against the curb so that it was hard to hear. "Here's some addresses and names," the blonde woman said, her voice louder. "Contact us when you get back. We're trying to change things and help people so they won't have to hide." "You think there's hope?" I asked. She smiled. "Yes, at least some hope," she answered. I took the names and addresses from the woman. "Gracias," I said to her, and the man. "Muchas gracias," I said again as I walked quickly down the street. Then, just as I turned to go into the bus depot, I saw a flash of golden green go around a corner. I wondered if it was the back of the Quetzal lady. As I stood in line, my heart ached from saying goodbye to Julia, Oscar, Tomas, and the others. But I also thought about the blonde woman, the poster, and the addresses. I would memorize what she gave me and get rid of the paper.